There's two things that really, really scare the Tories, and especially happening under them. After all, remember at this point, they've been in power for well over a decade at this point. They can no longer just turn around and just blame the last Labour government and say, oh, see, it was all their fault. It was all their, quote, reckless spending. Yep. Think about it this way. Under the Tony Blair government, under the Gordon Brown government, the country worked. People were very moderately happy. The country was in a very good position. And yet, look at where we are now. I would happily go back to living under a Blair government than our current, shall we say, Conservative government at the moment. And this is primarily because they drove the ideology of austerity. The idea of that if we cut, we can get into a position where we will have a positive balance for the country. And then, only then, can we start spending and investing in this country. But that hasn't happened. In fact, under Tory austerity, our budget has only tripled. Not only has this taken away any of the fantasies and the illusions that the Tories are good, fiscal, responsible partners, but the constant crisis after crisis after crisis is just knocking away the idea that the Tories are even a competent government anymore. So that's two things of them gone. And the other thing, which could very well happen, not only could we see potentially an economic collapse happen here, not anywhere else in the world, here in the UK, but also the potential fears of what's called stagflation. And we're going to get on in that today, and what that is, and why that is such a potential fear, and why so many businesses in the UK are worried about it. So, before we do jump into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And also down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support me. And on with the article. So, this comes from The Guardian. The title is UK Business Confidence Collapses as Fears of Stagflation Grows. Business confidence in the UK has collapsed after a month that has seen both supply bottlenecks, rising energy prices, fuel shortages, and looming tax increase combine to stifle growth. In its latest health check on the economy, the Institute of Directors said the statement had fallen off a cliff in September, adding to fears that Britain was on the course for a dose of 1970s style stagflation. The warnings from the IOD came as people queued up to fill on the garage forecourts and the road traffic fell in the last week. Online clothes retailer Boohoo said that its profit margins were being squeezed by higher shipping costs and the need to increase pay for staff in its warehouses. The IOD said there is a sharp fall in business confidence from 22 plus points to -1 in September. It meant that a return of the very much pessimism of February, when the economy was constrained by lockdown restrictions. Kitty Usher, the IOD's chief economist, said, the business environment has deteriorated dramatically in recent weeks. Following a period of optimism in the early summer, people running small and medium-sized businesses across the UK are now less certain than they ever have been before in the overall economic situation. And the IOD's director and the Economic Confidence Index fell off a cliff in September. A higher proportion of our members expect the cost to rise in the next year, and they expect revenues to rise. This has not helped by the government's recent decision to raise employees' national insurance contribution, which acts as a very distinctive and disincentive to actually hire just when the furlough scheme is ending. Although the ONS upgraded the growth estimates of the UK in the second quarter from this year to 4.8 to 5.5, the activity has slowed down since the middle of this year as a result of inflation rises, the quote pandemic and labor and supply chain shortages. The last weekly update on the economy from the ONS showed that job vacancies in the transport, logistics, and warehouse sector were up by more than 350% on pre pandemic levels. The combination of pressure has led to warnings the UK could be heading for a very much winter of stagflation, when a stagnating economy combines with rising prices. Sheffield Helland, the director of the British Chamber of Commerce, which represents thousands of companies across the UK, said ministers needed to work with firms to deal with the growing fallout from COVID and Brexit. Writing in The Guardian, she warned that businesses were facing the most difficult operating environment for over a generation. It's not just labour shortages, it's the price of energy, raw materials, and shipping have all risen sharply. I'm no longer taking or longer to move goods across borders, and businesses are facing high taxes in the coming years, he said. As Chancellor Rishi Sunak unwinds the emergency support scheme that helped limit the fallout from the worst recession in over 300 years, the Guardian's monthly dashboard of economic developments shows sign of distress spreading across the economy. Businesses and households are coming under growing pressure from rising costs. With inflation at the highest rate in a decade ahead of a very tough winter, the shortages of goods and materials will drag on growth. And the depths of the fuel crisis as petrol stations run dry and company bosses have warned that removing furlough and other support schemes has risked a perfect storm for growth and jobs. One of the issues alone would be tough, but together they create a perfect storm that will head into a very unpredictable winter, said Helliand. For over more than a year, The Guardian has tracked the economic fallout from the pandemic on a monthly basis, following inflation rates, the 8 key growth indicators, and the level of the FTSE 100. Faced with the deepest global recession since the Great Depression, the COVID Crisis Watch also monitors Britain's performance compared with other countries. And after suffering one of the worst death rates in the world from COVID-19 and the deepest economic slump in the G7, Britain's economy has somewhat recovered faster than expected, and forecast is to show at a faster rate among the wealthy group of nations this year. However, economic growth has dropped and is close to the stalling point despite the end of most of the pandemic restrictions. Official figures show that the weaker retail stages and shortages of workers and even raw materials has dragged the growth down from in July to just 0.1% on the month. And the IOD survey will add to fears that the economy has flatlined in the third quarter. And I've said this before on our Good Morning Walks. I remember when it first happened. We were in a recession, and very, very few people were talking about the fact that we were in a recession because a lot of people were really focusing on COVID at the time, which again, to be expected. But as I said then, we were hit by about 21%. 21%. That had literally wiped the entire reason for much of, shall we say, the Tories' idea of austerity off the board. It had wiped any progress they had made into trying to lead Britain back to a better place. At that point, austerity was dead in the water. But remember, people have been saying this since Grenfell, that austerity must stop. But it hasn't. And Rishi Sunak is very, very likely within the coming within the month to announce more cuts. And I don't know if you can see it on the screen. One of the stories under the most viewed is the Department of Education is considering the return of SATs and 14, and this is the important one, and axing teaching hour limits. That becomes hugely important. I think we are going into a very bad winter. I don't think this winter is going to be good for anyone at all. And I think that shall we say, the recent good economic rise has been pretty much driven by the fact that things have sort of gotten back to normal, so there was a bit of a boost. But I think that boost was very, very prematurely celebrated as a somewhat win and a success. I think we are in for a recession. I think we are. And you've heard me say it before. I think 2022 is going to be really hard for a whole lot of people in this country. I think this is all going to come together to create a really big, perfect storm, as was said here, the likes of which we haven't seen. And a lot of people talk about the 1970s. I think it's going to be worse than the 1970s. And remember, this is all going to happen under a conservative government that has been in power, that cannot blame any other government before it, that has an overwhelming majority. It's clear and it's large and in charge, and has allowed all these crises to happen on its watch. This is a failing of none other than the Tory party and the ideology of austerity. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, and of course the One Up Nation link, Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all